Welcome to CareSmart 360 on Air, a home care podcast. I'm Erin Cal, account executive at CareSmarts. Today, we're thrilled to have Anne Grady, a best-selling author, entrepreneur, and expert in building resilient teams, leaders, and organizations. Anne is a two-time TEDx speaker known for her ability to seamlessly blend storytelling, neuroscience, and psychology with wit, humor, and authenticity. In this episode, Anne will share her insights on the science behind resilience and practical strategies for combating burnout, particularly in the high stress field of home care. As the author of several books, including her latest, Mind Over Moment, Harness the Power of Resilience, Anne will outline a research based approach to cultivating a resilient mindset and skill set, empowering us to better navigate the challenges we face. Whether you're a home care professional or leader looking to build greater resilience, this conversation is sure to provide valuable takeaways. Let's dive in and learn from Anne's wealth of experience and expertise. Welcome to the podcast, Anne.
Thank you so much for having me, Erin.
Thank you for being here. So I'll jump right in. Home care professionals often face high stress, emotionally demanding work environments. What are some of the unique challenges that they may encounter when it comes to maintaining resilience and avoiding burnout?
Well, as someone who my journey started a little bit differently than I think most. So I was a speaker and a trainer before, but it wasn't until I had my son Evan that I really started digging into resilience. So Evan struggles with severe mental illness and autism, and raising him was really my resilience building breeding ground after multiple psychiatric hospitalizations. I was then diagnosed with a tumor in my salivary gland that resulted in facial paralysis and a whole string of other events, including falling down a set of stairs and breaking my foot in 4 places while going through 6 weeks of radiation. So I'm no stranger to stress and burnout. And I think part of the challenge when you're a caregiver, whether it's your own family or you're in someone's home caring for them, is compassion fatigue and vicarious traumatization. So it's really hard when you're an empathetic person to not take on the weight of everything that you're dealing with, and it just leads to exhaustion. Burnout isn't just because you're working too many hours. Burnout stems from our emotional needs not being met. And so it's learning to empathize without internalizing, and it's learning some mindset tricks, some skill set tools, and the ability to reset and take control of your nervous system so that you're able to navigate it more effectively.
Right. And your latest book, Mind Over Moment, Harness the Power of Resilience, focuses on developing this resilient mindset. Can you share some of the science-based strategies you outline for cultivating this type of mindset?
Sure. So, your brain is wonderful if you're only trying to survive and stay alive. That's what it was
Mhm.
designed to do. It wasn't designed to make you happy or fall in love or feel peace and zen. Your brain wasn't designed to keep you from stress. Your brain was designed to use stress to keep you alive. But as you've evolved, your brain can't differentiate between real stress and perceived stress. It can't differentiate between real threat and perceived threat. So, for example, if a car is careening at you and you see it in your rear view mirror, think about what happens to you physiologically. Before you even have time to think about it, you tense up, your shoulders get tense, your stomach tightens, you're bracing for impact. Well, the same thing happens when you get a snarky email, right? And so what we can do is train our brain to interpret those things differently. And it starts with the mind, the brain, and using it to work for us rather than against us. So everything we do virtually, over half of everything we do, I should say, is a habit. It's just a cognitive shortcut so that our brain doesn't have to work as hard. So it takes any repeated thought or behavior and it converts it into this shortcut. But your brain doesn't know the habits that are helping you or those that are hurting you. So your brain can't tell the difference if you come home at the end of the long day and have a glass of wine or a pint of Haagen-Dazs or go for a jog. It just takes all of these things and creates these shortcuts. So one way to use your brain to work for you is to understand that we have something called a negativity bias, meaning we are much more hyper overt to negative experiences than positive ones. And that is our brain's protection mechanism. But if we're not careful, we start to see the world through that lens and we tell ourselves stories about our life. Now, this isn't when somebody else asks you how you're doing and you're like, oh, I'm going to fake it till I make it and say I'm fine. I'm talking about the stories we tell ourselves. So, for example, I told myself for years how unfair. my life was? Why do my friends have healthy kids that they can take to the grocery store? And the police end up getting called when I take my kiddo to the grocery store. And so the thing is that story's true, right? It's not fair. But the question that you have to ask yourself is the story you're telling yourself about your life helping you? Because if it's not, it's becoming this negative feedback loop that is reinforcing the biology of stress. So many people think about this kind of toxically positive culture that we live in, which is like, that frown upside down, so much to be grateful for. I'm not talking about that. Your brain doesn't make the leap from this stinks to this is awesome. But your brain can make the leap from this isn't fair to it is what it is. Or I can't do this to I'll figure it out. Or I'm so exhausted to my life is full. Right. And so we can shift the story that we tell ourselves going from a negative to a neutral. And when that happens, our brain realizes it's safe. So just like your brain can't tell the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat, it also can't tell the difference between real and perceived safety. So when we shift our story intentionally or change our narrative, it signals safety to our brain. And one really quick mindset hack that anybody can use is to be very deliberate about the way you start your day. So most of us are guilty of sleeping with our phone next to our bed because it's our alarm clock. Well, guess what? They still make those. Your world is the smallest slot machine, or your phone is the smallest slot machine, and it's like this dopamine hit, but it also releases cortisol in your body every time you get an incoming message, email, task to do. So instead of waking up and checking social or checking email or watching the news, with all those things, basically it's like flipping on your negativity bias light switch. When you expose your brain to negative stimulus within that 30-minute window, like email, social, or news, you're training your brain to look for everything that's wrong throughout the course of the day. Whereas if you give your brain 30 minutes in the morning to wake up without negative stimulus, so it could be watering your plants or snuggling a dog or getting your kids ready for school or staring out a window, or even better, practicing gratitude or mindfulness, right? Those are things that shift the way your brain is. And then there are skills to offset that. So for example, anytime you cultivate positive emotions intentionally, like gratitude, humor, optimism, connection, volunteerism, self-care, anytime you're doing anything that your brain sees as safe, it's basically offsetting your stress response, lowering cortisol, lowering blood pressure, giving you a hit of dopamine and serotonin, the feel good, happy hormones, and antidepressants. Anytime you spend with other people, you get a surge of oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, but it's really a stress hormone causing us to seek connection. So we can do things intentionally to let our brain know it's safe and to build this buffer zone so that when we are tired and we are exhausted, we have the resources we need available to do it.
That's really powerful. In addition to mindset, what are some practical, actionable steps home care workers can take to build their resilience and better manage stress on the job?
So probably the simplest and most important is to get sunlight within the first 30 minutes of waking, if at all possible. It resets your circadian clock, it improves mood, focus, energy, sleep. The research is very clear. Sunlight is really, really powerful, especially within that 30-minute window of waking up. Um, our mind is completely overstimulated and oversaturated in the world that we live in. Our mind wasn't designed to sit under fluorescent lights and memorize 6,000 usernames and passwords. Our mind needs silence. So, like something as small as just taking 2 minutes in your day when you're starting to feel that stress, and just taking 2 minutes, go to the bathroom and just take deep breaths. I mean, it's not the ideal place to breathe deeply, but you do what you got to do. And simply extending the exhale longer than the inhale relaxes your entire nervous system. So mindfulness, right? We think of meditation as the ability to just focus. It's really not. It's brain training. It's attention training. So even 5 minutes of meditation every day helps restore gray matter density damaged by stress, repairs neurons damaged by stress. And the goal of meditation is to refocus after you've been distracted. So a lot of people are like, oh, I'm screwing it up because I can't just focus on my breath. Nobody can. That's the way your mind is designed. But you can grow your attention muscle, which is one of the only things you can control, where you direct your attention and where you direct your effort. And
Mhm.
training your brain that you're in control of it rather than it's in control of you is a quick way to do that. Making time for things that fill your cup. They're usually the first things that fall off our lips when we're busy. Our connections with others. We're wired for movement. Even, sitting for long periods during the day increases your risk of heart disease, and a whole slew of other health challenges. Even standing up once an hour, just standing creates a whole cascade of physiological and biological changes. So there are tons of little things. One of the simplest things is a gratitude practice. And when I was struggling with facial paralysis, people told me, practice gratitude. And I kind of smirked at it a little bit almost. Okay, yeah, right. But there are over 11,000 studies that have documented the physical and mental health benefits of practicing gratitude, because what it's doing is training your brain to offset your built-in negativity bias. It trains
Mhm.
your brain to look for what's right instead of what's wrong. Even just looking for something to be grateful for. You don't have to find anything. Just looking reduces the stress hormone cortisol by 23%. So these are simple things that you can incorporate into your day, taking a couple of minutes to just breathe deeply, extending the exhale. Focus
Mhm.
on what's right instead of what's wrong. Um, when you're exhausted, it is really hard to take care of yourself. So I recommend creating a list of things that fill your cup so that when you are starting to feel depleted, you can proactively and intentionally add those things into your schedule.
Mhm.
Um, we need time off. Our brain needs a break. And that doesn't mean staring at our screen. It means taking a walk outside, or being in nature, or spending time with the people who when it's hard. No one does this perfect. That's why this is a practice.
Yeah, absolutely. Resilience is often viewed as an individual trait, but how can leaders and agencies foster a culture of resilience within their home care teams?
So I work with leaders at companies like Google and Johnson and Johnson and Microsoft and Dell to focus on building resilient leaders, because you've got a lot of tired people and you have tired leaders that are tired of leading tired people. But you cannot promote what you don't practice, right? So it's not enough for a leader to measure KPIs and strategic objectives. They have to start measuring health and well-being. And that means incorporating some of these practices like gratitude and mindfulness and connection into daily activities. I'm launching for the first time ever an entire digital program that is a year full of resilient building skills, tips, tools, and strategies for leaders to take and use with their teams to facilitate conversations, to create team activities, to build those connections.
Mhm.
Because the happier people are at work, the happier they are, period. And we
Mhm.
know that the top two derailers of job satisfaction are: one, your immediate supervisor, and two, the number of positive interactions that you have at work. So leaders have a huge responsibility not to be a therapist, not to have all of the answers, but to be willing to be vulnerable enough to have the tough conversation. Because psychological safety, this permission for candor, is the number one determinant of high performance teams. So things like cultivating a growth mindset, building connections and relationships, team well-being, creating shared values and expectations. All of these are things that leaders can learn to do, not just for themselves, but so that they're modeling it.
That's great. And last question for you. What are some of the warning signs that someone may be heading towards burnout? And how can they proactively address those issues before reaching that breaking point?
Well, I love that you asked that last part, which is how do you do this before you're at the breaking point? Because it's much easier to prevent burnout than it is to deal with it once you experience it. Not to say it's impossible. But if you lost enjoyment of activities that used to bring you joy, or you feel constantly tired, regardless of how much sleep you get, or if you're more cynical or critical or skeptical of your coworkers or others, or if you feel like, you know what, I there's not enough hours in the day to get everything I need to get done at work done. I'm just constantly overwhelmed. All of those are signs of burnout, irritability, frustration, agitation, exhaustion, depression, anxiety. The thing is, your brain defaults to the place it spends the most time, and so does your nervous system. So, in order to combat burnout, you have to train your brain and your nervous system to go to a state of relaxation instead of being amped up. And one of the greatest gifts that we can give ourselves is learning how to control our nervous system on demand. So, for example, anytime you yawn, if you've ever seen dogs who play together, they yawn afterwards. Well, it's a signal of safety to their brain and to the pack, relaxing their nervous system. So, a yawn relaxes your nervous system. 3 diaphragmatic breaths, breathing in through your belly, extending a long exhale, resets your entire nervous system. So a deeply relaxed person takes 6 to 7 breaths a minute. When we are starting to get stressed, we get less oxygen, we take more shallow breaths. So you can shift your nervous system in real time by changing your breathing. And when you do that often enough, your nervous system eventually defaults to that state. You can do things like incorporating what I call lighthouses, things that we can swim toward and look forward to. Part of the struggle with COVID is that there was no end in sight. And, all of our vacations were canceled and the things we look forward to, spending time with friends and family, everything stopped. And you saw depression and anxiety completely skyrocket. And that's because when your brain has something to look forward to, it improves mood, energy, and motivation. So scheduling intentionally things at the end of your week, or things that you can do once a month, or things that you can look forward to a couple times a year, those are really powerful in helping you stay the course without completely burning.
Thank you, Anne, for sparing your time and sharing those great insights. I'm sure the audience has found these useful. I know I did. And thank you all for tuning in. Until our next episode, this is Erin Cowell signing off.